Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to take a look at Made in Abyss, Binary Star, Falling into Darkness, and its dead zones. So to start, the camera uses about a 25-26% axial dead zone. Vertically, I tested about 27-28%. That could be error on my part. That's just when I started noticing movement. Being axial, this applies all across the axis, so any movements you make, in this case around the vertical axis within the dead zone, is this only outputting horizontal movement, and the same is true around the horizontal axis. If you're within this dead zone, you're getting pure vertical movement. You only see diagonal movement occur when you break out of both axis dead zones. And this is more obvious when capping the view like this. The acceleration curve for this game is a little slower than a quadratic. The exponent is about 2.3, so that means turn rate starts low and then builds up to its maximum. This curve seems to be applied per axis rather than per magnitude. I've covered this in a few other games now, but per magnitude is the distance between your stick position and the center. However, per axis means that it takes the separate horizontal and vertical components and applies a curve individually to each one, to each axis, and that has some ramifications for your diagonal movement. So normally if it was normalized, if the stick range was capped, it would slow down movement. That doesn't seem to be the case here, but it does put a bias on your angular movements, so there's bias towards whichever axis you're closer to. So if I moved into these green regions, diagonal movement, you're seeing diagonal movement, but as you can see, it's pretty subtle, and that's because of the curve being applied. You have to move significantly further than you would otherwise to be able to see that see diagonal movement occur more dominantly. So this makes it, even though it's not restricting angular movement, it can feel more restricted because of this. So this isn't really a big deal as far as just general camera movements, but for, say, the ranged weapons, if I make a large circles, you can see that it's heavily biased towards the four directions, and this is, the axial dead zones are a huge part of this, but when you're in the diagonal regions, you can see if I bob around the diagonal regions, it wants to sort of cling to the axes more, and this is a little difficult to show, but and that can make kind of accurate adjustments more difficult. The dead zone's a factor in it, the limited diagonal movement, but then the biased diagonals are all issues. This game doesn't really require much precision, but this does impact it. Another thing with the camera is that the horizontal sensitivity is much faster than the vertical, so setting them the same, this is the horizontal sensitivity, and this is the vertical sensitivity. Unfortunately, I can't find a real accurate gauge for the exact proportion because I can't look up fully to really get a good reference for what the true ratio would be. But ideally, you know, the options, if they say the same, they should, you know, be the same. But anyway, movement is about a 32% rounded square dead zone. And it has the same restriction as the camera, so I can make these bobbing motions, and the character is moving perfectly forward and back, perfectly right, and perfectly left. These restricted regions are most obvious right around the dead zone, so you can see pretty clearly when the diagonals kick in. In this game, there's only one base speed, aside from when you're sprinting. So this moving this right past the dead zone and moving the stick fully has no effect on your movement speed. So there's no reason not to push the stick fully, and in this case the restriction isn't as egregious, but you can see that just tracing the stick, you still have large swaths of it that are limited to 4 directions. The other 2 dead zones I want to take a look at are the map cursor and the wheel dead zone. So swapping both graphs. You can see that the map cursor is about 24% axial dead zone. And if we cap to the top, you can see that this dead zone applies all throughout. And if we cap it over here, you can see that applied to the vertical axis. Now, the map cursor requires no precision at all, and there is aim assist on these icons. And when zoomed out fully like this, quite a bit, you can see that you have to make quite large stick movements to overcome this aim assist. However, when zoomed in fully, you can see that it requires quite a bit less to power through the aim assist. The wheel dead zone is square to access anything. And I tested this because I was interested to see if the axial dead zone would warp the thresholds between these 8 divisions. And you can see that there's this angular restriction in this diagonal line. And see, if you follow it, it'll meet with this line over here at maybe about 20%. And so this angular restriction is being based around a 20% axial dead zone. And the central square is interesting, but if you look here, the distance from here to here is shorter than from here to here. And what that can mean is that if you move diagonally, you may bleed into one of these cardinal directions, depending on how you move the stick. So there's a bit more bias towards the cardinal directions than the diagonal ones, but this is relatively small, so it's probably not noticeable in normal gameplay. It's just an interesting implementation for it. The last thing I want to demonstrate is how this game would look like with circular dead zones. So I'm going to use an Antideadzone demonstration for that. So to switch the graphs. So what you can see right here is this darker node now is the normal stick input, and the transparent node is what's going to be output to the game to counter its curve. So I've set up a circular 20% dead zone just to try to make it more clear so the nodes aren't overlapping as much. But so when I break out of this circular region, you can see as I trace this circle, it's countering the game's dead zone, and it's skipping over the restricted diagonal regions. So instead of this being restricted, now you now have full diagonal movement, and you can see that conveyed as I just bobble over the axis line. You can see that being reflected in the character's movement by them kind of vibrating. So now where you push the stick is where the character moves. The camera is the same. If I trace right around the dead zone, you can actually see that it's not tracing the square, and the reason for that is, well, it would jump over it anyway, but the reason why it's much further diagonally is that it's countering the axis curves. So if you can see right around here that it skips over the axial dead zone, but it moves quite further beyond the axis very quickly, and then slows down to meet up with the stick movement. So it's countering the axis curves to undo any of the more cardinally biased directions. But I'm also set up a quadratic curve radially to try to replicate similar to what the game's curve is, just translating that to a radial curve. So this is an attempt at a circular dead zone with a quadratic curve. So comparing it to what I demonstrated before, you can see that there's now when you're making movements, there's no restricted movement, and if we do this around the vertical axis, you can see that smaller movements are being conveyed more clearly when just bobbing around the axis. And if I was to make the same circular movements I made before, you can see that that's quite a bit smoother and doesn't appear to be locked to the cardinal directions. So this can make it smoother to line up shots. Of course, I'm still have a large dead zone applied, but this can make making adjustments easier than the default, and you have more granular control over the angle you want to move at. So these things are obnoxious. But anyway, I don't know if there's any plans to release updates for this game. There was one just a bit ago, but I don't know if there's anything beyond that. But if there is, it'd be nice to see at least movement change to be circular, because that would make it so that where you push the stick is where the character moves, and you don't have these gaps of just pure cardinal movement. For the camera, again, this game doesn't really require much precision at all, but even if they kept the axial dead zone, it would be nice to see them at least address the axial or axis-based curves and change them to be radial. There are quite a bit of shooters on console that use axis dead zones, and but for the acceleration, it's radially set up, so at least diagonally it feels consistent. But that about covers things. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a good rest of your day.